Welcome to the Binge Thinker podcast.
I'm Jay.
And I'm Sam.
The two of us enjoy meeting up to discuss the things that interest us.
We'll be focusing on topics concerning science, philosophy, culture and politics.
And we hope you find this discussion as interesting as we did.
In today's episode, we talk about education.
We touch on curriculum, the future of schooling, homeschooling, and some other topics. So the first thing on my mind is I was given an article at work the other day by a guy who trained as a teacher, and it was talking about the decline in attendance at university. And he came, obviously trained as a teacher. He saw this as like a really terrible thing. He was like, kids aren't coming to school anymore.
I think people don't see the value of it anymore.
Well,
not that they don't see the value of university generally. I just think, given that, so now that we live in an era where almost anybody can go to university because it's funded, that money that goes towards paying for your course, it's not out of your own pocket. You're not actually paying for it.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, so there's another person who works with me there who goes to university as well, and she had almost exactly the same opinion as I think quite a lot of people do, in that we are the ones paying for the university. The university gets paid either way.
Do you mean we? You mean by tax?
We and the students.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, obviously there's loans involved, but we're taking on a loan.
But I mean, just in terms of the thing about attendance dropping, if you had it so that only now you've got a bit of a trade-off between elitism and like freedom, like going the freedom for anybody to go to university, and also the point that if everybody has a degree, then the value of a degree goes down, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But so in the pursuit of making it so that almost anybody can go, we've devalued the value of a degree. But in doing so, I just think with university attendance, because we've made it so that anyone can take out this loan, just about anyone who's above a certain level of intelligence, which is probably the vast majority of people.
Yeah,
you can go to any
arts degrees.
you can go to liberal arts. You can do a degree in anything. I think I saw a degree in like in different types of soil. I think it was like a spout off from geography. And I mean, really, there's one at Manchester University on mummies. On the process of mummies and mummification, and there's a degree on I think it's called Egyptology. Anyway, the point I'm making is, I feel like because it's become so common to go to university for almost anyone, it cheapens the experience generally. And as a result, instead of you only just being able to afford to go, or some of the richest families being able to afford to go, where you're in a select few, you know that you're part of a group that, like, you feel more.
You feel like
invested.
You've earned the right to be there.
Exactly, best way of putting it. So you feel like you've earned the right to be there, and as a result, I feel like you'd be much more likely to go to all your lectures.
I think to a degree that is true, but that isn't the point I was going to go on to make. So, the point that we realised is, I've done not terrible at university. I've got friends who've done really, really well at university, and some friends have not done very well at all. There seems to be no relationship to going to lectures and succeeding in assessments or exams. So what we tied it down to is people finding lectures of a huge number, say 250 pupils, not particularly enticing or inviting or useful, especially when, and this is a point I want to go into later about internet resources and stuff, especially when it's all put on the internet afterwards for you to do later if you want to.
Yeah, well, there's the lack of incentive to go, right? Because you can always pick it up on the internet later.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. But what this article went on to then say is and I should probably find the reference to the article at some point, but it went on to say in smaller groups, say like one teacher and 20 students, like a seminar or a practical, attendance shoots up. Everyone goes to it, which led me to thinking maybe it's more of a fact of feeling distanced from the lecture and the lecturer and having no personal relationship to the experience.
But I mean, so a couple of things. First of all, that actually ties into exactly what I said about the cheapening experience of it. Like,
because you're surrounded
by
about
how everybody can get in and get a degree and whatever else. you've got huge groups of people attending university. You've got large lectures that are upwards of 200 students in one go, right? If like I said, there was fewer people going overall, then maybe you'd find that as well. Can I just say about lecture attendance and grades? I do think there is a weak positive correlation.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying overall there wasn't. I was saying from my personal experience, the people I know. You get told it all the time by tutors that going improves your experience. I've got no reason to disbelieve that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say the place I heard it from was university. They'd said to us, like, if you're interested in stats, if you are statistically, scientifically minded, then I'm telling you, the data says the more of the things that the contact time exactly. If the more of the contact time you actually spend in university, on average, there is a correlation. You will do better. Yeah. So I didn't realize. I didn't think that's what you were saying.
No, not at all. But I think there's a further level of analysis to go with that. If you were to, maybe if we were to look at what the lecture was, what the content was, what the ratio of interaction was, maybe you'd find slightly a curved finding that people who go to. Again, this is kind of spurious and more research ideas than anything I've actually read, but it seems to me quite likely that if you were to drop those numbers down, or measure it independently of the big lectures, attendance would have a far greater effect in small classrooms than large classrooms.
I'd be interested to see if there's any actual literature on
this. It's like I only read it the other day, but it's an idea. I don't think there's very much damage that could happen from having a more personal relationship with a tutor leaving a lecture in terms of the academic sense, not in a
right. Okay, so this is a total left field topic, but it seems to be quite related here, right? Is that, do you remember? So there was that article, which we can put links to everything that we talk about in the podcast. Yeah. There's the article about how, was it the CEO of one of the Silicon Valley companies, one of the big tech companies? Can you remember? I sent it to you. Anyway, the point is that they said as automation increases and people lose jobs, we'll be able to increase the one-on-one types of of jobs. So doctors, teachers were two of the examples that were given. Yeah. Now, if it is, we know it's the case that tech expanding at its current rate will lose quite a lot of jobs. But maybe if you want to be positive about the future, and it's so rare that people are positive about the future nowadays, but hopefully we might get a greater proportion of teachers to students.
Hopefully. I think it's definitely a thing we would strive to. It's more a problem with feasibility. We don't know if it's actually possible, but I don't think in principle there's any way that could be a negative experience. Like, again, talking anecdotally, but I remember at school and things, there was the disruptive kid who may or may not have been diagnosed with ADHD, was constantly getting sent out of the classroom. I remember in my school, there was a bit of a reform in the way those kids were treated. Rather than just being locked in isolation, they actually got like a personal assistant.
Yeah,
who would come and work with them.
That's my experience.
Those people, as far as I know, the ones I've met aren't doctors or anything like that, but their grades definitely seem to improve, and they definitely had a bit more interaction in the classroom when they did come back. So I don't know.
Something that
could be a thing.
I'm sure. Like, again, I bet there's plenty of research talking about how smaller class sizes are generally a better thing. Yeah. And like you say, just going back to the original point you were making about attendance, it's very possible that one of the reasons why attendance is lower is to do with how impersonal it is. Yeah. So we can hope that if the predictions of certain people come true, that these more one-on-one, personal, human sort of jobs, as they become more valuable, as the more labour-intensive jobs become automated and more people are looking for work, then hopefully that's something, if we're going to try and be positive about the future, hopefully that's something that we can, hope will happen in future.
Yeah. Just to spitball, do you think there are any potential disadvantages? Is there anything that comes to mind that having a one-on-one relationship might have? The only thing that I've only just briefly thought about, but the only thing I can think of, and it isn't necessarily even a disadvantage, is the people who didn't want to be there in the first place would find out much quicker that they didn't want to be there if they had a teacher constantly asking them personally questions and trying to involve them in the class.
All right, okay. I've thought of a disadvantage.
Okay.
How about, you know how? So we can talk about lower stage education in a bit. I've got a couple of things that we should mention. In fact, we can go into that next. But the whole point of higher education, I say the whole point. One of the major points about higher education, and one of the changes that people find as they go into higher education, as they go into university from GCSE and that kind of thing, is that it's a lot more self-motivated.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah, for sure.
one of the, I would argue, and I think you could make a good case for it, one of the most important things you learn from university with regard to education and academic life is that you have to be self-motivated. Now, do you think that having too many teachers, professors, teachers, staff for contact would actually negatively? So you see what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
So you would almost, as contact with staff increases, the amount of independent, intuitive, self-motivated study would probably go down. And I think that's got to be a negative thing.
Well, yeah, okay, so I can kind of see that.
Negative.
Although I think there is a point that needs to be made that the education style and style of assessments that happen at university are completely different to... if we're comparing the ratios of teacher to pupil to high school and A-level, the work that you do at high school and A-level, apart from a little bit of homework, is all in class. Whereas at university... you have contact time.
Almost none of it is actually in class. Well,
exactly. Apart from some practicals and stuff, depending on what.
Well, actually, depends what degree.
Yeah, exactly. Frankly. Depending on what course you're doing, you might actually.
At least in my experience, I would say definitely over half of what you were expected to do. Well over half was in your own time.
Yeah, well, I mean, we both studied psychology undergraduate. I feel like way over half was it. It was.
We did lab classes,
but that's also kind of the reason. Like I stopped going to lots of my lectures, is because we weren't doing any work in the lectures. We were learning things, and I find
that's the lack of personal touch as well, though, right? It's a bit on the periphery, but it links.
I mean, partially.
Well, if you're not actually being asked to do anything.
Yes, so I think that's the other point. It's not just, and I completely forgot about that. I wanted to talk about it. It's not potentially just to do with the size of the class, but the fact it's not active. You're not doing anything. But so in some of these lectures, and I imagine you were the same at Manchester. Doxed you a little bit there. I imagine you had some lectures that had lots of people in. Some lectures had fewer in, but you had some where there were maybe a couple of hundred people in. And every now and again you have a lecturer who halfway through the lecture has a task or something, or a question he asks the audience. How many responses did you get in a lecture with 200 people compared to in a seminar with only 20, 30 people? Is the act of actually even trying to interact when the group is that big and the chance of embarrassment is that much higher, is there actually any point?
Well, there's like you were saying, there's some pretty interesting psychology going on here. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to get back on the books again. Yeah. But just from the top of my head, I can remember that it's like de-individuation as you sink into a crowd. Your personal responsibility for whatever task is at hand is decreased.
100%.
So I mean, that's well understood.
But that's also augmented by your self-vulnerability. It's made much greater. It's not just that you feel less
especially at age
responsible.
18 as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But these people you've only known for 2 weeks. I mean, obviously, and to be fair, again in personal experience, by year 3, it did seem like interaction in classes was going up.
Oh yeah.
You knew people around. But your first year,
you've got used. You know how you are better at university generally.
Yeah.
Assuming that you've got to that point.
And you have micro groups as well. You probably sat with a group of friends who you feel more comfortable around. So
you probably live with them as well. But yeah. I think we can try to round that one off now. I've got something I really want to talk about. So this is something I think's really interesting, and I think it's one of those things that is really difficult to give a solid, correct answer for. It's one of those ones that you would just obey. So what I'm putting out here is, how much of a child. So let's go from a university back to early years education. So even like, Key Stage 1 in the UK, and the early grades in the US. How much control should the student have over what they learn? So I'll give a kind of. I think just to put it out there, my position is that actually children will need to be forced. Is a strong word. Forced, it has bad connotations to it, the word forced. But I think children, there's a set of things that children wouldn't want to learn
that is vital.
That are vital for them to learn. I'm asking you now, if you never actually forced a child to learn to write, would they learn to write
exactly
off their own back?
And
Probably not.
There are example where people don't.
Exactly. So, and I was talking to a friend of mine. This is where this this idea first came up. Mate of mine at uni, he was taking a radical flip on the idea of how early years education works. He actually has a kid, so he's looking at it from arguably a more involved perspective than mine.
Yeah, actually.
And he was talking about He was talking about how he raises his son, and how if you give kids the chance to choose what it is they want to get involved in, then their passion is more kind of it's more like organic, and it's more. You know what I'm getting.
No, 100%.
But the point is, I think we kind of we fell on different sides of this. I think he was saying that the very act of forcing a child to learn something makes it distasteful for them, and you get people who fall by the wayside. You get people who actually end up hating education from an early year because they were forced to learn this, that, and the other. Usually, maths is one of the ones that people tend to hate. They have kind of almost a visceral hatred of mathematics from a young age.
I can understand, because of all different subjects, it probably has the least inherent, at the moment, applicability to what they're doing. But I completely agree that, well, one, let's just make it a fact. Children who, if they pick a subject they're interested in, they are way more interested. But you have to preface that fact with the fact that kids are fickle as hell. Like, as a kid, my interest changed on the weekly.
I mean, some things take sustained effort.
Exactly.
And you're not going to find that.
And it's hard to teach a kid. I mean, well, you can try and teach a kid that, well, yeah, you find it boring now, but, in a year, once you've got it, like, nah, they're not going to care about that. I mean,
children are intelligent, don't get me wrong. But this kind of long-term, future-oriented thinking that you need to build skills for the future and sustain interest in things long term so that you can become very good at them. I don't feel like children are well known for having those skills.
Of course not. But
so, I mean, I just think that if we're talking about education reform, I think the vast majority of people would agree. I mean, really, let's just take a step back. The school system that we have at the moment in the UK, arguably, has had chance to reform for quite a long time, and it, a lot of processes are kind of evolutionary in nature, and if things don't work, they get stripped away, and the things that do work
continue. If they're good enough,
they continue.
Survive.
So you could make the point, I'm sure people would argue with me, but you could make the point that the way that the education system is now, we're just talking about the UK for now, is because it works, or at least it works well enough. That's the key. The key phrase. It works well enough. So I don't know. I think the question is a question of degree. Like, not should we change the entire primary school education curriculum so that children can choose exactly what they learn and when? Because we know that's never going to work. Like you say, kids are fickle. But is it possible that you could make reforms that would benefit children, make them more passionate, make them more engaged?
Yeah. Well, so you've made that's a lot of points.
Yeah,
okay? And I can't remember half of them, if I'm honest. So I'll start where we began for now, and you can remind me if there's anything you said I forgot. Right. Okay. So with kids choosing different subjects and stuff, we've got to remember there's different levels of education. Each level of education has a different role in my view, and it has historically. They've changed over time. Primary education originally was to get kids clever enough to be able to do minor tasks in labour forces and stuff like that. It's moved on now where the stuff you learn at primary school now, if you were to go out into the job market, not really going to help you particularly much. That's moved up to higher education in high schools and A-levels and things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're right in that, your friend is right in that kids should have the first section of education in a way to discover all these different areas. But there are still key stages that they need to learn. They need to be able to count, maybe do 10 times tables or something by the, I don't know what the actual thing is, but by their age they're 12 or something, to prepare them for higher education. But as you move on from there, it becomes this increasingly difficult balancing of act of, we want to inspire you in our subject, but you also have to pass these exams because we need to know that you're progressing and going to be ready for the next stage. So there's a lot of balance there, but also I think a really important point is that subjects aren't, I disagree with this, I disagree with what you said, that some subjects are inherently just like kids won't like them. Maybe on like a statistical level, but not every kid hates maths. Maths was my favourite subject when I was 6, all the way to about 12 or so, and then I found more interesting stuff in science and things. I can't really comment on why it was interesting. My mum used to play maths games in the car, maybe that was part of it. Don't really know why though. Can't remember that far back. Wasn't really paying that much attention to education. It was just a thing that happened while your friends were there in between break times. But when I got to high school, subjects that I'd hated as a kid, like English and science, I later loved. I think partly because my teachers were fantastic. They were really inspiring and actually good teachers. They had a balance between controlling a class and being disciplinarian and things.
Yeah, I don't think we can overstate the role of a good teacher.
Yeah, for sure.
In fact, you could, whatever problems you say that our education system has, whatever problem you might put forward as an issue we have, you could probably just about fix that, or you could mitigate some of the negative factors of whatever you might put forward if you have a good teacher.
Yeah.
I think a good teacher will just about solve almost.
So this kind of relates to what you were saying a little while ago before this little thread of conversation about the potential idea of having and you brought this up when we were talking about this a while ago. The idea, in principle, of having one teacher per student, say, or one teacher per 5 students, sounds brilliant in principle. But what if the quality of those teachers is significantly less than it is nowadays? Would the less pupils to student interaction counteract that?
So are you trying to get at the idea that the relatively fewer teachers that we have nowadays, compared to, let's say, what we were talking about earlier about how if you can get a huge influx of people into it, the reason we have, the fewer we have now, relatively speaking, are in it because they really want to do it.
I wouldn't say that. It's along the right thread, but I'm not making any assumptions about why people are teachers. I know lots of teachers are in there for the money and absolutely hate kids and think education's just a way to make some cash. They don't care.
I'm sure you'd grow to maybe like this.
Oh, I hated them. Those were the teachers I had at school and the subjects I hated, and they left.
To be fair, at school you could tell that there were teachers who really did not
care.
They did not enjoy being with children. They did not enjoy.
I'm not going to name drop. That's probably a bad thing to do.
But it goes back to the quality of teachers again.
So, but just to tie those two completely different points that would just happen to momentarily cross over, I think if that ever was a thing that people were considering, we would have to consider the potentially inherent benefits of a closer relationship with a teacher to the necessary requirements of just getting thousands of teachers that may be subpar and worse than what we have now.
But I mean, having a larger number of teachers coming in might mean that we are getting some excellent teachers that we wouldn't be getting otherwise.
Definitely. And
but I mean that's just one side of the coin, because the opposite is also true.
Yeah, you get terrible. But I guess, depending on supply and demand, you'd potentially be able to weed out more of the. I mean, then you end up with like a load of sociological problems as well, though. Who gets the good teachers and who gets the crap teachers, and
You would hope it would be randomly
Yeah,
distributed, but it wouldn't.
Of course it wouldn't.
There's no way it'd be randomly distributed. No way.
Anyway, what was alright? So that was a big tangent. What was the next point you made after kids free thinking?
Yeah, well, I think I've pretty much rounded that one off. It's just how could you? That it kind of came down to the fact that I don't think that we need to upend the system that we have now, because the system, it sounds like a bit of a cop out, but the system is the way it is for a reason.
For the way it is.
There will have been studies done, and they have made changes over many years. Anyway, the point I'm making is I feel like
that it fits the purpose for now.
It fits the purpose for now, but I'm not prepared to dismiss the idea that giving children more choice might actually positively affect the outcomes. And that's really all I have to say on that subject. I think we should maybe move on.
I don't know. I mean, let's briefly make an extending point.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about automation and changing needs of society quite a lot. Basic skills and stuff are always going to be necessary. You need to gonna need to know mathematics, like to a certain degree, and you're going to need to understand how the English language works if you ever want to effectively communicate your point.
Mm-hmm.
But in a world where jobs and job markets and requirements for those jobs may get more and more specialised, do you think we'll end up having to streamline what kids learn and narrowing down that choice for the future market? Because you said that the education system is the way it is now because it works well enough for now. But what if we're approaching a cusp where it soon won't work well enough for now?
Okay, so this is a good point, and I actually had a conversation with a guy at work the other day about this. Now, I think most kind of thinking people have had the idea that one of the purposes of school is to bring people up to date with the things that have happened in the human race up to this point. Where are we? What have we discovered? And what do we know so far, right? Mm. If you take that idea to its logical conclusion, then you would think, the longer we continue to develop as a species, the more there will be to teach. Now, I thought, okay, so that seems to make sense on the surface, but the more you think about it, the more you realise I don't think that's actually strictly true.
Yeah.
So you're talking, pardon me, you're talking about things becoming more specialised, right? Mm. Like as we get more and more, as we get more and more advanced and more fields show up and things like that. So I was thinking, it's true, obviously history will always increase.
Yeah.
But I suppose the relative importance of events
exactly. We don't teach all history. I remember. I mean, I love history now. It was one of the subjects at school I hated because I didn't see the point of it. But now, getting older, I think it happens with most people. You start taking more of an interest in history as you get older. But the things we were taught, the things that were made to seem important, like they don't matter at all. Particularly, I think in all areas that you might learn history, there's a massive tailoring of what you actually learn. As we move further and further, things... I mean, we'll always be interested in our history and how we got here and stuff, but there are little bits of, like, in 2,000 years, who the hell is going to care what Henry VIII's wives were? That was, like, the prime focus of my whole high school history education.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's a whole conversational segment to have about why what we learn is useful or what and if of what we learn is useful. But that's a separate point. The point I was just going to say was I don't think it seems like I'll just run through the point I was going to make. It seems like as we go on in time, there will be more and more to teach people, and will the schooling system have to change to accommodate that fact? But I was thinking just to kind of illustrate the point is, in science, there's only really one set of things that are true at any one time. Like, you could teach it as history of science. So the point I'm getting at is, right, historically you might have taught Newtonian physics as this is physics, end of story, this is all there is, right? Now we know with like quantum mechanics and the various advances in physics and how we've noticed discrepancies in Newtonian, especially when in extremes like really really fast and really heavy. So we've had to change it and add new things. But arguably, as we get closer to the truth, old ideas will be rejected because they are false. Now, if you were gonna take a class on the history of science, then you could include all the things that turned out to be false. But
Well, I think there's a further point to what you're saying in that the things that we need to know now. It's to say, for example, if you were to start an IT course now, I mean, quite often I know a few people who have done like computer science and stuff, and you do learn something of like the history of how you got there. But for the vast majority of it, you're learning about logic gates and maybe web design or something. You don't learn how the program you're using to make web design works. You learn how to use the program in the first place. All that knowledge that came before, you don't need to know. Is that kind of the idea you're getting?
Oh yeah, well that just means that you're learning practically what you need to know to get on.
Yeah. So, but that's the thing. So that is I think again spurious points, but I think that has been happening throughout all of the education system. But that's the exact reason we went from only having a primary education that everyone has to do, and then every other thing is an elective that rich people get to do. I think the very fact that we've got to high school education, I don't want to say in high school, we're not American, but anyway, secondary school education, I think it is, and then college, and then university now being a really popular thing, like you said, that everyone going, is the fact that nowadays you tend to need more and more specialised knowledge, and the only way to get there is by, although you don't hit every single branch on the tree on the way down, or I guess on the way up in this case, but as you're branching further and further out into the knowledge, you do still need to follow a general path towards this eventual, very specialised goal.
I think, I mean, so the direct answer to your question about will the current education system continue to be suitable given as we become more and more advanced and more fields, I think the short answer is we don't know, and that's a cop out. But we can't predict the future because we don't know how. Like, what if something is discovered in the near future, towards the middle and end of our lifetimes, that changes how we view everything else,
of course,
we have to, or we get a psychological finding that completely turns on its head what we understand to be true about education.
Yeah,
like we find this is kind of going a bit out of the way, but suppose it becomes possible to interface with computers. Like, I think
it just makes everything.
Elon Musk was talking about this.
Yeah, you'd have instant access to the whole library of human knowledge. You wouldn't need to learn the basic
on that
facts.
subject. While we're here, because there's some really something interesting that popped up when I was having a conversation about this before. If it does turn out to be true that you can interface with computers, and as a result you can, let's say you have access to the internet, but via your mind.
Yeah.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on how or why that would be really difficult and almost impossible with the technology we currently have.
Everything we know that's human.
But the kind of pace of technology as it's going on at the moment is it's not totally impossible to imagine that being true in I don't know however long, a decade's time, whatever. But I think something really interesting about that is if it turns out to be true that the average person, not the average person, but it becomes biologically possible to connect with the internet, then there is no value any longer to being really knowledgeable about something. That profession no longer.
For sure, yeah.
Because if you think about it, right, you've got at the moment when you watch BBC News or any kind of news program, they invite an expert on to talk about, I don't know, let's say sea turtles for whatever reason. That's the subject of the day. That person is an expert in sea turtles. They've spent 40 years. They've done an undergrad, master's, PhD, professorship, and they really they know everything there is to know about sea turtles. If you get to a point where we can connect with the internet,
and guess all their papers.
Guess what? I know everything about sea turtles as well.
Right. So one of the, but I mean, we're getting way off on a tangent here. And
that would actually render education almost useless.
Well, right.
It will change the nature of it. So
we started off by one of the points we said maybe we'll talk about is education reforms. One of the things I get really annoyed about the lack of in education at the moment is the lack of teaching critical thinking and how to understand science and see arguments and evidence for what they actually are, make an informed opinion. I think education would be entirely, in this case, being able to connect to the internet, which I don't think will ever happen because I think robots will far exceed us and they'll take over the world and don't need us anymore. But anyway,
that's a topic for another day.
another time. imagine everyone has this ability. Everyone can access all the information. How much crap is there on the internet already that is completely wrong? If you think about any subject that you could research, any topic, any question, chances are there's a handful of topics that have the actual answer. Then there is a handful.
Health is a really interesting one on that. You know, like how, like if I'm just talking about as an example,
Merriam-Webster and all that kind of thing.
Well, I'm talking about like nutrition, like
yeah. Oh, just bogus.
If you look at how much crap there is on the internet about anything to do with lifestyle, really, to do with relationships, to do with health. Like you're saying, if you had access to that, so yeah, you're right. Actually,
I'm gonna make a political point, but anything where anyone can make money,
there
will always be an expert who got a degree from this little school that no one's ever heard of. But so the education there could be completely replaced by the new expert would not be the person who knows the most, because everyone knows everything.
The same.
It would be the person who knows the most true truth about the knowledge there is to be known.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to get into a political conversation.
Yeah, right. I mean, so the summary point I wanted to make with that was IT. Okay, IT is one of those. It's been a topic in the news for a while that everyone, you need to invest in IT. There's going to be massive job growth in IT because it's constant. Every single week, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what the original point was you were making, but it was something to do with it feeding back in and then collapsing upon itself. IT is a perfect example. I came across an article the other day. It was talking about how certain sectors in IT are getting pretty scared now because people are accidentally or purposefully replacing their jobs with programs they've made that can do it to the same degree or better.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who he graduated from university in IT. He did like an IT course or something. Went to go work for a company. Can't remember what it's called. But long story short, ended up doing program bug testing. But they were very simple programs, so they weren't particularly difficult to do. And he realised he could just write a script that would do it for him, and they can just sit there and just like watch TV or watch YouTube. And then he got found out, and he lost his job. Because they took his program he wrote as intellectual property of the company.
Oh, holy shit, really?
And he works somewhere else now, it's fine, he's okay. But he wrote himself out of the job because of his expertise.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, automation's a topic we're probably going to talk about lots in different podcasts.
I think we'll actually have an entire podcast on automation.
Oh,
maybe more than one, actually, because there is a lot to talk about.
Anyway, so education.
I think we should move on to a separate point now. Okay, so the next thing I'd quite like to talk about would be homeschooling. And I don't know if you know anybody who was homeschooled. I actually don't.
I've met one or two people.
You have?
I've not really known them very long or very well, but I know them a bit.
So there's actually a lot to unpack with this. Like, I mean, I was saying before, like, just then, it's interesting that it's even a thing. You know, it is cool that it is even a thing.
Yeah. That
you have the right by law, if you wish, to have your child, you know, to take them out of state education to teach them at home.
Yeah. Do you know if assuming you have to follow the same curriculum though, isn't it?
I don't know if it's the same. It's a bit like university, you know, where you have like modules that are definite that you have to do.
Right, and then there's optional.
Ones.
Well, I think they still have to come in to do exams, don't they? I remember at A level.
Well, yeah, because otherwise, how would they be assessed?
So if they do have to come in for the exam, surely they have to study very similar things. Otherwise, they wouldn't know the.
Well, unless that thing that they're going to be examined on is one of the necessary things.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I was thinking about a thing like maths in a high school.
You get this idea of homeschooling as being this kind of wholesome sort of vocational experience for the child, where they kind of learn much more hands-on, practical way of living, like, you know, living off the land and. You know, I'm saying that's how it appears.
I'm not quite sure that's the image I have of it. But
oh well, okay, maybe for me then. But the point I'm making is why would somebody want to homeschool their child in the first place?
The only reason I can think of is they don't trust the education system.
Yeah, well, it's very conspiracy theory-esque.
Oh, definitely.
But you could say that, you know, if the government has any interests that it wishes to pursue or to,
that's where they would be indoctrinated.
Exactly. I mean, you've got generations of children. You know, the next generations of workers and taxpayers.
Yeah.
are coming through our schools, and if the government did want to push an agenda, I'm not saying they do, I'm just putting it out there for the sake of saying it, is that if there was an agenda to push for the government, then, you know, in the schools would be, I mean, children's brains are so
but
plastic
unless there was some amnesiac hypnosis. I don't remember being told, like, go to DFS, buy sofas.
Oh no, I
fuel capitalism.
I think honestly,
support the Tories.
I think that.
But no,
I
understand.
I get your point. I get your point, but I think it's a lot more. Not that I necessarily believe it, but in defense of people who believe that and would choose to homeschool their children, I think the propaganda, quote unquote, is a lot more subtle.
Well, I think that's a potential idea, and maybe it's more popular in certain countries.
Maybe some parents don't feel that the subjects that children learn in school are useful.
Yeah, but I assume that the curriculum must be very, very... Because you don't really... I mean, once you get out of high school, you don't have homeschooling anyway. If you go for further education, or maybe you do. Maybe you do at A-level now that it's mandatory.
I thought it was primary school based mainly.
Yeah, I think... Well, I mean, at high school as well, the guys I know were homeschooled at high school.
All right.
Yeah, but anyway, to talk about the reasons why, I don't think it's any conspiratory thing. I don't think it's anything to do with that. I think it's almost definitely must stem from a mistrust of the teaching ability. It'd be really interesting to see what the rates of homeschooling are like in people that could afford to go to private schools versus those who would have to go to public schools.
Well, that comes back to the point that I made, wasn't it? Like, why do people do it? Because if you find a difference among social classes, then that would help you work out why someone might do it.
Yeah, I
mean, quality of education.
You'd have to adjust it for like catchment range and stuff. Oh, does catchment range matter for private schools, or is it like a purely? Well, mind you, if you've got the money to go to a private school, you probably have the money to move in the vicinity.
I think it's fairly common for people to move to go to private to get to better schools anyway. I'm fairly certain that's normal. And I'm looking at this here, and it looks like you have to get the permission of... That's interesting, right? It says right to the head teacher if you plan to take your child out of school. This is on gov.uk.
But what if you were never in the school at all? Is that not more about leaving school rather than just not joining in the first place?
Interesting.
But I think it is a weird one. I mean, let's say, for example, in a particular case, we can make one up and say little Johnny is, well, he's probably not called Johnny, he's probably something very aristocratic, but he's just leaving primary school education, going to high school, and his mum's a sociologist with a degree, and his dad's a doctor, and they want to teach him the high school curriculum from home. I think the likelihood there is, one, that they're doing it for the fact of they think they can provide a better education. And let's just assume for now that that's true.
No, that has to be the case.
Probably.
I mean, but why would you, like, as far as I can see, the only reason... Well, there are lots of sub-reasons, but for me, the absolute primary reason you would homeschool your child is it has to be because you feel you could do a better job.
Well, not necessarily. Why would you not do it? Well, not necessarily. Well, I mean that's always going to be true. Yeah. I'm not trying to deny that, but I mean there may be other reasons that they don't want them to be hanging around with different kids. They want to have them in an insular education system, whatever. But so the point I want to make is just let's assume in this like made up example that the education that this kid is going to get is better. Like these guys, the parents not only are very clever and knowledgeable, but they're actually good teachers. And the kid goes and does the exams at the end of year 11, quote unquote year 11, and gets really good grades. So the education is not a problem in terms of academic achievement. But the thing I've always been a bit weird about with homeschooling is I've only met 2 or 3 homeschool kids, and to be fair, I became like fairly good friends with them after a while. But when you first meet them, it's very difficult because like the social skills they have are not developed like at all. There was a guy I went to college with, and he was a great person, and we made friends after a while. But when you first meet him, it was very difficult to gel with him. It felt really abrasive because he didn't understand the subtle social cues and stuff. It was almost I mean, I don't want to suggest that people take their kids for homeschool and stuff, but it was almost like a degree of like autistic behaviour. Like nothing actually really being cognitively wrong. It's just a misunderstanding of social situations. I don't know the degree to how that held him back when he went to college and joined in with everyone.
I suppose once you've joined in with everyone, if you're quite adaptable, you probably would pick it up pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's pretty large topic area. I mean, maybe it's not the best for right at the end of the podcast. Maybe. I
mean, we've only just touched on a lot of the topics.
Yeah.
I mean, we covered some interesting stuff about choice and, well, some of it was anecdotal, but, you know, we're touching on some interesting research. And I mean, education is such a massive topic.
The area is a bit too broad to get
absolutely, but I mean, we don't have to squeeze all this down into one conversation. We can definitely have further.
We can revisit it at some point.
Definitely, I think we'll have to, because we've maybe only touched on a few, maybe 4 different topics today.
Yeah. There's definitely some extra things I'd like to talk about, but conscious of time.
Okay, good conversation. Cool. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider subscribing.
You can also follow us on Reddit and Twitter.
Thanks for listening.